All right. We're here with Karen+Harrington, who's running for the 20th District in Florida. Debbie+Wasserman+Schultz, the evil Debbie+Wasserman+Schultz's district down there. Karen, thanks for being with us here at Publius Forum.
Thank you, Warner. Thanks for inviting me.
Sure. I'd like to start out with Debbie+Wasserman+Schultz. I mean, you know, we're all conservatives that visit my website and whatnot, and we're all aware of just how wacky she really is. And you have on your website some of her greatest hits, if you will, of some of her wackier statements. But she still commands an awful lot of respect. I mean, she's the current Democratic National Committee head. She's a Democratic representative, 20th District. And even though she's a total lunatic and one of the most vitriolic people in Congress, she still has a lot of people that vote for her. How do you plan to get voters that may come to your way to see this?
Well, last time, Warner, we did a great job. We only had 5 months to campaign, and we brought in almost 40% of the vote. So we had Democrats come on our side last time, and that's only with 41% of Republicans turning out for the vote. So this year, even more so, because she is the DNC chair and people are seeing her on that national stage, they realize how far to the left she truly has gone. So it's not going to be easy for her to get reelected. And we're getting many of the Democrats and Jewish people in the community that have had enough for her. Because only the Democratic Party, only about the left 20% have that same liberal-minded thinking that she has. So we believe we have a great opportunity this year to beat her.
And you bring up the Jewish vote. That's a pretty good point for your district. It's a sizable Jewish vote there in that department, or in that district rather. How is your reach out to them? How is your association with the Jewish, the Jewish community there? Is it growing stronger? How strong was it the last time? And I should mention before you get to the answer that you did run in 2010 against Debbie+Wasserman+Schultz. She got 60% of the vote, but 40% is probably that you got is probably some of the best GOP numbers that's been seen in that district in almost forever. So that having been said, back to the Jewish question, has your outreach improved, or is it still the same as it was last time?
No, from about last year to this year, it's already tripled, and we're still a year out. We've reached out to many of the synagogues, many of the rabbis, and in fact the Jewish community is actually calling me and reaching out to me.
That's a good sign, huh?
Yes, many of the people in the Jewish community that are Democrats, like I said, do not identify with who she is and representing this president in the failed stance on Israel. So we are getting a lot of support in the Jewish community.
And certainly that has to be part of that, the president's failed stance on Israel. I mean, let's face it, he's been seen to be more of an antagonist to Israel instead of Israel's friend like we have been for decades.
Yes, and lately, Debbie's latest thing, as well as her lack of support for Israel, is because she has to stand by this president. She also has blamed the Republicans for the creation of Hamas. That's been her latest thing. But this president asked them to stop building in the settlements, asked them to return to the 67 borders, and just the other day was caught with Sarkozy, saying negative things about Israel. I mean, this is a country and a nation that needs to stand by Israel, as our history has shown us to. And Debbie supports this president and his policies. And you're right, Israel has become more endangered over there because of our approach, or in lack of strong support of Israel.
So as a representative, what would be your basic position on Israel if you were to get into Congress? What would be the things you would work toward for our relationship with Israel?
Well, first of all, we'd like to get back to that strong relationship that we had under the Reagan years, in the Clinton, and the Bush years, and just solidify that relationship once again. I think Netanyahu realizes the American people support Israel, and I think he recognizes that this president is just a short-term, one-term president, and as soon as the next good conservative Republican president comes along, that support will be there. But I can tell you, growing up in South Florida, in the Jewish community my entire life, my support with Israel is very strong, and I will make sure that that message comes home to my district and my constituents.
Well, speaking of Israel being a strong ally, it's also a strong economy. It's one of the strongest economies in that entire region. But there's another strong economy not too far away, India. Have you thought about what you might, try to implement as a representative from Florida regarding India?
Now, I know India is having a lot of civil turmoil right now within their own nation, and they are a great country as well. that has been able to create a lot of jobs and grow their industry, but I really haven't thought about how us as Americans, how we want to get involved with India and help them through this process. But they are another great nation that is showing what democracy can do and what entrepreneurs can do. So we should find some way to help them as well.
Something, if we could develop a better relationship with India that we've lost since George W. Bush has left, they could serve as a great counterweight to China.
Absolutely.
Which is something to keep in mind. But back to your own race, back to your own race there in Florida. Three other candidates are facing you in the Republican primary, and I'd have to say, from what I've read, at least two of them are kind of quixotic, if you will, candidates. One has maybe a little bit of legs. He's a Jewish man himself, and may expect some support from the Jewish community himself. But obviously you have the name recognition, having run in 2010. Are your internal polls showing that the other candidates really have any traction in at all?
Well, what we're seeing is just overwhelming support, like you said, from last year. I mean, it's very humbling for me as a first-time candidate for that short period of time that over 60,000 people voted for me. So we believe we have that 60,000 vote head start. And we announced back in late March. So that'll give us a year and a half this time. So we believe with the amount of volunteers that we have that they should see things our way. I don't mind having other candidates in the race. I think America is better with competition. And they'll make me a better candidate and just remind me how hard I have to work to beat my opponent, Debbie+Wasserman+Schultz. But we are very confident that we will be victorious.
And speaking of other candidates and other viewpoints, people that you may not necessarily have endorsed yourself. In the past, you've sort of kept yourself a little bit arm's length from the Tea Party movement. I know that you've spoken at some of the Tea Party events as a guest speaker. You don't claim to be part of the Tea Party necessarily. So taking that into account, to what degree, or do you disagree with the Tea Party, or do you really embrace them pretty much wholly, and you're just trying to balance that, that electoral map there?
Well, you hit it on the head. I said, first of all, as a conservative Republican, I don't think there's anything that the Tea Party does that I don't agree with. We're completely in line with our philosophy. And last year, I guess people asked me if I was a Tea Party candidate. Most of that label went with someone who came out of the Tea Party. And I didn't come out of the Tea Party. I just came out to run a race as a Republican. But we have a great Tea Party group down there. I speak to, I go to, I'm a member of, and I line up with the Tea Party completely. And I welcome them into my campaign, and I know that they're going to be the difference makers because they attract so many independent voters too, people that perhaps don't identify with the Republican Party. So I embrace the Tea Party, and I applaud everything that they're doing. And compared to Occupy Wall Street, I think America's really seeing that their message is a patriotic one of less government, low taxes, strong national defense, and that message is going to resonate this election.
Well, it also seems like the Tea Party folks also seem to, even from day one, to have had a coherent message, whereas this Occupy is just all over the map. But do you think that this Occupy movement might develop into something? Do you think it might actually, just like the Tea Party has, the Tea Party went from outsiders, protesting on a specific set of principles, to now many of them insiders all across the country, having gotten elected themselves. Do you see that as a pattern that the Occupy will take, or do you think this will just float away and fall apart?
I'm concerned with the direction that the Occupy Wall Street will do. It's absolutely right that Americans are frustrated that we don't have jobs and we have tremendous amount of debt and overreach of government. So they have the right to be upset. I just think they should be upset in Washington, not in Wall Street. But I don't think that they'll continue to grow. I'm hopeful, but I think they're being fueled by the unions, by the George Soros types, to try to create that divide of class warfare. And I don't think they're protesting for the right reasons, and they're actually hurting businesses in the areas in which they do protest. So they're really contradicting, what it is they're out there for. So I just hope that they recognize that we do have a lot of problems in our country, but Wall Street did get a lot of bailouts, but it started in Washington. So they need to refocus.
And you're a businesswoman. You own a restaurant there. Plug your restaurant. Plug the restaurant.
We own 3 restaurants, actually.
Oh, it's all chain.
Okay. Well, we have 3, and 1 in Hollywood and 2 in Pembroke Pines, all in Florida, for 37 years.
Fantastic. Well, being a businesswoman, you've had to deal with regulations. as a representative, what would you do about this avalanche of regulations that hit us yearly?
Well, right now, our restaurant, we just faced a couple new regulations, so I can tell you I lived that real life experiences of accepting those regulations, which are against my will, of course. But what's happening in government is our president is not going through Congress for approval of these regulations. He's going through the back door of the EPA, the Department of Energy, and implementing these regulations without congressional approval. So we have to go there and stop something like that from happening. And I'm a little discouraged that right now our Republicans that are in D.C. aren't stepping up and holding him accountable for the unconstitutional way he continues to go through the back door of these departments. So we've got to stop the regulations and the way that they get approved.
Well, that's a good point, and I write a lot about regulations and unions. And I've been saying for a while that Congress has allowed its powers to be slowly taken away from it by both the courts and the unions and the president, for that matter. But speaking of the unions, what kind of support do you have from unions? How do you stand on unions in your own area?
Well, I think everybody has the right, if they want to vote for a union, if they want a union to protect their rights or their job, they have the right to do that. It's a shame to see that some unions come along and take advantage of the worker and manipulate them into believing something else. Down in South Florida, we don't have a strong amount of unions. I don't have any union support right now. I actually haven't reached out to the unions. I don't think they're as strong in South Florida. Although my opponent, 80% of the money that she brings in comes from union PACs and special interest.
Right.
So I'm sure there's that's how she believes that she needs to raise her money. We're raising our money through the grassroots, through the people in the district, and that's how we believe we're going to win this race, is to continue to get the support of the people right there in the district.
Well, and also speaking of support within the district, financially especially, fundraising and whatnot, we've seen these days that congressional races have become national races, regardless of what the intention of the candidate is. Have you been seeing people reaching toward you from outside your district?
Oh, tremendously, especially since a couple months ago we got the endorsement by Mark Levin on the
radio show host. Right.
So that was fantastic. And just as coming here today, before I came, I went online real quick and got a couple new donations out of Nebraska, out of California, out of Hawaii. We've had them from Alaska, a lot from New Jersey, New York. So the race has already become national.
Right.
This is going to be the Alan Grayson race, I think, of 2012. People recognize that these people just aren't thinking logically. And Debbie's rhetoric is, continuing on the national level to upset people. So they're going to want to come after her. And people have to know that you don't have to live in her district to be impacted by what she does in Washington. It will impact your life. So that's why we're getting the national support. They know that if God forbid, the liberals ever take over the House again, she's set to be the next speaker. And now is our perfect opportunity to get her out. This year in 2012, considering the direction of the country. She supports the president, failed economic policies, his stance on Israel. Now more than ever, this is our tide, this is our wave, just like 2010, to continue to ride into Washington and send really good, sound conservatives.
Well, on that hopeful note that it's going to be the Alan Grayson election of 2011, for those watching that are not quite sure of the reference, Alan Grayson was the wacky representative. Was that the 2nd district, I believe,
yes,
in
Central Florida?
And he lost last time in 2010, got cremated, and he was exactly like Wasserman+Schultz, completely out of his mind on the floor. Some of his antics were nuts.
Yeah.
So on that hopeful note, we'll end, and I'll just mention that her Karen+Harrington's website is Karen4 Congress. That'd be F-O-R, not the number 4. Karen4Congress.com. On Twitter, it's Karen4 Congress with the 4 and not the 4, with the number 4. So Karen4, the number 4 Congress on Twitter. And you can also find her on a great little site that they've made up called FireDebbie.com. Fire Debbie is got some great stuff on there. So we thank you for being with us here, and we wish you all the best of luck.
Well, thank you so much.
Sure enough.
All right.